So this is just an overview of what some of the most important bits. It's important to start with what's not being covered, right? Because if we're dealing with e-commerce in an environment where governments are increasingly using the digital domain, we want to know whether government data, government transactions are in fact being covered. And they haven't agreed yet on whether government data is going to be excluded. So that's a really important issue because it not only involves questions of privacy and questions of confidentiality, it involves questions of security and protection of information from misuse, such as sale of health data to insurance companies and marketers and so on. So government data, important issue, not sorted. Also not agreed yet whether it covers financial services and financial data. Yeah? And that again is really important given the way now so much of finance is, in fact virtually all of finance is digitized, whether it's within the country or cross-border. And if we look at the potential for financial crises, it's in the highly speculative, fast-moving domains of e-finance. And it's not clear yet whether that will be covered by these rules. But of course, Mode 1 in various financial services commitments will already capture quite a bit of that. As we've seen previously, also not clear whether subsidies and grants are covered, and there's an awful lot of money, government money, that goes into startups or providing for access to deal with digital divides and so on. So important questions there, and not decided yet whether there is an exclusion for government procurement of digital services, which again means things like libraries and a variety of entertainment services and so on that are part of the public domain, public broadcasting using the digital systems and so on, but also the internal use by governments of digital technologies, whether it's the land information holding system or the security GCSBs, databases, or that would come under the security thing that I'll mention. But so those four really important areas, they haven't even agreed to exclude those. Yeah? So not agreed yet to exclude government data, financial services, subsidies and grants, or government procurement, even with that very limited definition of government procurement.
And were all of those excluded in TPP, e-commerce?
Financial services was, government data was, subsidies and grants, I think were. I have a marked up copy I can tell you later, but yeah. It's also not yet been agreed whether countries can schedule any reservations to this annex. Yeah? Or certainly to its most significant obligations. And as we're going to see, the only protections that they've written in there are really, really weak. Now, when I've been doing analyses of the annex, I've divided it into 4 parts. Right? The first one is the one that the industry wants, right? Prohibiting national regulation. Right? So there's a pile of rules that are consistent with what they wanted about prohibiting regulation. Then there are a second lot of rules that are really weak, privacy and consumer protection rules. The third is the really strong state security rules. But the really strong state security rules are proposed by the US and would allow the US to override the really weak privacy and consumer protection rules, which are weak enough in the US without weakening the stuff further. And if you're looking at actual real e-commerce, as in doing commercial transactions across the border, it's this little bunch of issues down here. So it's not about trade. It is about giving the big digital players the ability to run the world for the next 50 years. And I'm not going to go into quite a lot of these, so let me just take them one by one and try not to send you to sleep. Right? Let's start with the reverse order. Right? Easy bottom one. What's the actual real commercial and tradey bit in here? Well, this is what Sonia and I are trying to work out at the moment. Electronic authentication and e-signatures, recognising them. Right? Now that, we believe, includes the encoding, when you have a password and stuff, and so the recognition that the person who is seeking to do something is actually that person. And so rules about that, which if you're putting in orders or transferring money or doing those things, it's a bit like coming with your passport or your fingerprint or whatever. And so that's a genuine tradey kind of rule. No customs duties. Again, that's a genuine tradey rule. Might not like it, might have real significant fiscal impacts when you have more and more and more cross-border e-commerce, but it is at least a real tradey one, and there is a fight going on in the WTO about the moratorium on customs duties being extended to being permanent.
That means taxing data when you cross-border?
No, it means goods. Means if you're sending stuff in a physical form or an e-book form that might attract a customs duty, a digital equivalent of a good, But stuff that comes in from Amazon, one of the reasons it's cheaper is that it's usually not got your taxes on it, and so there's issues that's genuine tradey stuff, right? And international cooperation, about rules around trade.
Yeah, I mind saying there's been no tariffs on services. Has there anyone ever attempted to put, what's the history of that? I mean, it was never my custom.
Yeah.
No, not on services.
No, and because the origins of the GATS were parallel but separate from the GATT, they have drawn analogies for what they call non-tariff barriers, which are the regulatory barriers. But in terms of border taxes, because most of the early services stuff was Mode 3, was foreign investment and so on, there's not been an attempt to do that. It's only when you've got to digitize services that are equivalent to the hard goods that you've got an issue. And I think we're going to see more of that question come the more we have 3D printing, because we've now got, Amazon has made an application for a patent to be able to, why is it a patent? They have an application. I need to check out exactly what it's for. What they disclosed in there was that they want to receive the order at Amazon Hub and actually produce the good in the van by 3D printer to the consumer, which may be across the border. And then you've got issues about tariffs for goods, and where was it created, in which country? Yeah? And I think these are going to throw really difficult curveballs up for old-fashioned trading goods. Yeah? Just as the e-books have, or the iTunes versus CDs and so on. Yeah? But it's moving so fast. Okay, so that's our real tradie stuff. We're on that. That's easy. Yeah? The strong state security one. The US has made a proposal that says basically when a government says it needs to breach the rules in this annex for its essential security purposes, it's allowed to. So totally self-judging, totally comprehensive, no criteria about when you're allowed to do it. And Japan has said, please explain this a bit further. This is much stronger than the security exception in TiSA covering the whole of TiSA, which is much more limited in its scope, and we'll see that on Friday. But it's similar to Australia in its schedule, putting in the security exception all the way, but that wouldn't apply to this, because it's only going to apply to the rules. So it would apply to Mode 1, it would apply to computer-related services and so on, to the extent Australia has put those in its schedule. Yeah? But what the US is wanting is, clearly given stuff that's been happening, this really comprehensive, complete ability to disobey all of the rules if it says it's in its security interests. Yeah? But it also means it can disobey the rules that have the weak protections in them, not just try to deal with the evil empire.
Maybe in other countries as well?
The ones, it's the US that has made the proposal. To date, that's interesting. I didn't look closely. Those who are supporting the US are Pakistan, Mauritius, and in the last version, Australia.
Yeah, but can they overrun by using data or whatever information from other countries?
They can display any of the rules in the chapter at all. So, yes. So they could, if our data was if we had data from our country in the cloud inside the US, and there was a requirement in here that the US has to provide certain protections for that data, which there are, but they're very weak, the US could ignore that and just raid the data. Yeah? And so could Australia at Pine Gap.
Could that be used for a country to defend?
Yes, it could. Of course it could.
Temporary character or
Yes.
long-standing?
It doesn't say. It says nothing in this annex shall be construed to prevent any party from taking any action which it considers necessary for the protection of its own essential security interests.
So you would say that the protection of the personal data of my citizens.
Essential security interests. Well, that opens a can of worms, a legal can of worms that I won't dig out. But its own essential that it considers necessary for its own essential security interests is considered to be self-judging, right? It considers necessary for its own. But there is a long-standing question in relation to security exceptions about whether it is purely subjective or there can be any interrogation of the reasonableness or the objective grounds on which it did so. Can it be required to disclose the grounds on which it did so, and so on. So that's an argument that's applied to the old security exception. What they've done with this wording is to try to make it as absolutely self-judging as possible. Yeah? So and the US, whenever this has come up, and it has come up a few times in previous GATT disputes, it has refused to even participate in the hearing. Yeah? And you can't actually proceed with the process if they boycott it. Yeah? And so yes, the EU could cast